Okay, we'll be starting slowly the next panel. So my name is Denis Maksimov. I'm a curator as well of art and programs in here, and I chair this next panel on performing knowledge, and specifically on lecture performance as well. And I'll start with a form of a paper, let's say, but I actually framed it more as an introduction of the medium itself as well. And we have a hybrid panel, not in the form of it being both physical and digital, but also in the form of what you're going to experience. So we have both papers, and we have two lecture performances as well. I will be followed by the lecture performance, Nikolay Karabynovich, and I will introduce each speaker separately. But before I'll turn to that, let me deliver what I would call my lecture performative paper, and I'll sort of will deliver it maybe in the more lecture performative format as well. And would be great to actually, first of all, think about the lecture performance and the performing knowledge as something that rather actually expands to a way longer time span than we normally think about it in terms of the art historical context. And first of all, here I would invite you to basically go very much back into history, actually going back into the prehistory in as such, prehistory of storytelling. And storytelling in that sense, I would claim, is the oldest form of art making. And particularly, we obviously would not be able to follow a lot of the knowledge on the subject of how the storytelling was evolving and was structured, basically, as we don't have the data. But there are specific case studies in the context of which actually we can assess particular cultural contexts within which we have that data. And that particular context of my research actually are the ancient Greek poets, actually, ancient Greek poetry. And specifically, I would give you a little nudge on the three of them, on the epic poetry, symphotic poetry, and lyric poetry. There are more styles of those, but those three are maybe the most relevant to what we're talking about when I speak about lecture performance as being a transhistorical and transcultural form of presentation of knowledge. So symphotic poetry, for example of which you see, the setting of which you see in there, is the poetry that was performed in the private contexts, in the context of symposium. Symposium was not what we have now at the moment in the ancient Greece. There was a drinking party. And there was a drinking party where people were reclining, basically, on this sort of beds, consuming the mixed one-to-one wine with water and salt and honey. But at the same time, they were listening to political, ethical, and moral speeches being performed in front of them in a private context, in that private context. So that's something that you can actually very much compare to how lecture performative context looks in the for example, spaces like Kunsthaus at the moment, where you don't have more than 10 to 15 people attending lecture performances. And that's still, and I'll return to that later in the sense of the audiences. And symphotic poetry, in a sense of the subject as well that it addressed. And again, I would not dive here in what meter it was written, that does matter, but really what is important and interesting in this context are what subjects were presented. And we, again, do not have too much of the symphotic poetry reaching us, but something that we have of Anacreon, of Theognis, for example, is presenting the subjects such as politics, ethics, the praise or blame of someone, specific, for example, ideas about the morality and ethics of today. So this was the subject that was presented in this sense. Then we have epic poetry. And the epic poetry was presented to the larger audiences. It was presented into the ritualistic context, into the context of specific festivals, for example. And that was meant to actually work as a collective memorization ritual. The epic poetry as well was structured very much on the basis of the idea of repetition. So there were specific parts of it that were specifically recited in the periods of time, so the audience would be able to remember what was said. And epic poetry also addressed, unlike sympotic poetry, way more impersonal subjects. And the politics that it addressed in the first place was politics of heroes, politics basically that in a way formed what we call the political identity of the pan-Hellenic culture of the ancient world. And then the actually we could a bit skip that. But then, you know, fast forward a little bit to the history in the first to present you further the evolution of the presentation of knowledge in this sense. We come to sermons as well, to the culture of messiahs and the culture and the specifically the emergence of the theistic cultures in the Judeo-Christian world, but in many other places actually you could trace the same transhistorical and transregional agenda. Was Jesus a lecture performer? So that's a question that I would leave with you, basically. And was he a successful one? That's also a question that we should maybe leave unanswered in that sense. And if we reframe, in the sense, conversation about the sermon presenter, basically, in informal setting, as you see, basically, on this wonderful illustration from some Malaysian cult that I found online. So this informality of the setting, actually, of the sermon presentation, carried also a very specific idea of power, of the message that's being delivered outside of the institutional power, institutional setting and verification of knowledge in this sense. Then we, again, fast forward again, further, and again, I could give you some more examples of the sermonists from the first millennia, and then later into that you could add up to here not only religious sermonists, basically, but many other presenters, basically, of specific ethical ideas and knowledge. But then, for example, an interesting fact about the Georg Friedrich Hegel shown in here, that actually he didn't really write much of what we know of his oeuvre. Many of the texts and many of the, for example, initial books that we know at the moment, the Phenomenology of Spirit and so on, are actually results of his lecture notes and results of the work of his assistants, actually, that were writing down his spoken word. And this, if basically imagine the fact that if the Hegel would not be able to lecture perform, and he definitely was performing, as here. Thankfully, we have way more data about knowledge, and we have way more knowledge and information about how exactly the Hegel lectures looked like, actually, and why they were especially assembling so many people, actually, around themselves. So some of the, again, textual form of knowledge that we have are also pretty much coming from the performative context. And if Hegel uses a particular university, basically, context, and the lecture became, over time, basically very much of a structured form, originating from the sermon, institutionalizing, and becoming very much of the, and again, institutionalized form of knowledge presentation. But within this institutional form of the knowledge presentation, there were availabilities always to push it into the specific loci of informality, like in the context of, for example, Hegel, who specifically was going into the opposition of the idea of the lecture as something that is being recited, and that were the lectures basically up to until the point of the 16th century. You basically were having a lecturer who was reading you the text, that was not widely available because, again, there were not that many texts printed, and the printing press was not yet that mad as at the moment of the, basically, of the 17th, 19th century. So Hegel represents this particular, basically, lecture performer at the moment, who comes at the cusp in a moment when texts are becoming widely available, and so therefore recital becomes way less, let's say, demanded or interesting in a way. And Hegel comes with his, basically, sermonic style languages and coming back to the past in that sense and using the technologies that you could refer, techniques, basically, rhetorical techniques of the ancient Greek poets, of recital, basically, and of the sermonists like Jesus Christ in order, again, to reactivate the form of creation of knowledge through the platform of the lecture. Then, fast forwarding again further, any of you recognizes this wonderful individual in this beautiful costume set? This is Hugo Ball, one of the founders of the Dada movement. And he's portrayed here, it's a photograph, he's portrayed here giving a lecture, actually, giving a anti-war statement, basically, in 1915, at the moment when the First World War was raging. Basically, he used the platform of the lecture in order, again, to upset the idea that the arguments for war or the anti-war need to be only justified by the logic and rationality. So that was the way to protest through the point of the lecture and basically upset the authority of the lecture as something that produces hard-line knowledge, basically. And again, everything I'm sort of leading you in here right now is not really very much omnipresent in the context of the art historical canon when we speak about lecture performance. We will get to that. So basically, before we'll turn to the first lecture performance in here, I would give you a definition in a way. And again, it's not the final definition of a lecture performance. It's not the only one. It's not the correct one, because one of the points of the beauty of this medium, from my point of view, that to define it, it's basically almost impossible. It's something that exists in the process. But what I will leave you with, basically, in the context of how I look at it, so the white space of this, basically, triangle is somewhere where I hope to find lecture performances. It's something that exists in that medium space, in between of the experimental theater, academic lecture, and artistic performance. It's neither of them. It's basically not the pure version of any of them. And it's some type of a hybrid that always travels within this triangle, depending on who produces this piece of knowledge and presents these ideas. Finally, again, I'll just fast forward to the moment of now, basically, and the moment of now of where we're now with the point of the art history and the definition of the lecture performance, which is very much America-centric in the first plane, because the lecture performance is being defined as something that was born in the particular New York context in 1960s, in the independent spaces like Kitchen, New York, for example, as a form of presentation of knowledge of minimalist and conceptual artists. I fundamentally disagree with this way of definition of the lecture performance, and I believe we need to open it up. We need to see the lecture performance as one of the most maybe transgeographical, transhistorical, and universal form of presentation of ideas that do not fall into the context of the systemic ways and the institutional ways of production of knowledge. And moreover, they are, and here I actually a little bit double down to the previous panel where Chantal Mouffe was quoted on the subject of the necessity to hold the places where dissent could be produced. And of course, we all know that institutions in dissent do not work with one another. We know that the institutions always are institutionalizing dissent in the form of the aesthetics of the presentation, but the beauty of lecture performance in this way is exactly in its undefinability, and that undefinability allows to present sometimes the ideas and the radical forms of criticism being dressed up as something else, as a game, for example, or as a form of the poetic address, or as a form of a recital. And for that particular reason, what I will end up on, basically, I think the lecture performance is something that has to continue, basically, move those frames of informality into the direction of being present in the institutions more, and provide the space for the dissent, and provide the space for the generation of knowledge and ideas way beyond of the forms of, again, cornering it into the space of either academic lecture or the form of the artistic performance, something that very often happens in the context of the contemporary way of approaching the institutions. Lastly, I would just, one thing that I would also just observe, if you would just even try to analyze, for example, the amount of time the word lecture performance, for example, or if you just will research the hard statistics on how many lecture performances are being staged in the institutions around the world, you would see a picture of basically of declining of the presentation of the lecture performances from the early 2000s to until now. What does it talk about? Basically, again, we could speculate a lot, but we also live through a very interesting geopolitical times and the ideological times where things becoming very, very, very restricted. Very restricted in the sense of the identity, defined very much and very clear. And that's also what I think is very important in the context of the lecture performance. This is something that upsets the specific normalities and boundaries. That's something that reminds us that knowledge, when we speak about the socially created knowledge, is the question of agreement. It's the question basically of the legitimation of that knowledge. And that process of legitimation is something that always moves and something that actually being overturned over time. And lecture performance has the agency that allows us to actually to present the radical ideas that form the definition of what is norm, basically, and move those norms at least in the small and very much of a safe context and spaces. And therefore, formalization of lecture performance is something that would rather kill the medium from my point of view. So on that note, a little presentation, I will first introduce our first lecture performance of our panel. So Nikolay Karabynovich is an artist.
Hi everyone.
Shall I give you little bio?
Yeah,
I'm prepared.
Please. Yep.
So Nikolay Karabynovich is an artist who is based currently in Antwerp, in Belgium. He is Ukrainian, and his work could be described as multimedia, basically in nature. He works in performance, he works in installation, with sound and acoustics, so basically all the ephemeral things that make performative work sort of irreplaceable in consideration to some objectified things. And I will take my seat, or you will instruct me what to do. Yep. But now floor is to the first lecture performance.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. You know, I'm an artist with a background in philosophy, blah, 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 a bit in academia. And my practice, artistic practice in general, it's quite like different in mediums. And the storytelling in general is a very important part of my practice. Basically what many artists is doing is telling the stories. And when you're starting to tell the story, the first thing that appears is the question of language. And then from the question of language, the idea of translation appears. And for me, it was very important to understand how this mechanic is working in the lecture performances, in general, in the lectures. Somehow, long story short, because we are a bit limited in time, I didn't want you to just listen. For me, the very important part of my practice is to interact with the audience. Here, now, I developed, and I was inspired by the childish games, by the kids' games. And I wanted here to recreate some sort of this game, but based on my works, based on my collages. These works, these collages, I was developing many years already. It was a part of different exhibitions in different places, museums, blah, blah, blah. But for me, it's gonna be a first example of this game today. And I will need at least 3 volunteers from you. And I have only one requirement for one volunteer, so someone has to understand at least one Slavic language, one volunteer. And the other 2 is just, yeah. So please, you can take a seat here. Don't be shy, it's you will just observe the artwork, and then you will need to tell to the audience. Yeah. So here in this envelopes, it's 4 of my collage that I pre-selected, and you have to pick it up one of this. Please, like, choose which one you like. Secretly, no, it's only for a first person. So maybe, maybe we need to switch off our places. Maybe if you can please sit there, I will sit here. Yeah. Yeah. So what you will need to do, you have to look to this college, but secretly. And then you have to explain, translate the meaning of this college to another person. And then you have to transmit this knowledge to another person, what you understand from the story from Denis. And then you will tell us what you what you heard, what you imagine as an artwork, and then in the end we will see the final collage. And then I will try to explain what was the artistic idea behind that, what was the meanings that I tried to express in this work. So first you have to do it secretly, yeah. And to avoid the sort of a pause that appears. You know, the colleges here, for example, you see the work that I did some years ago, and it illustrates a sort of methodology of my working ideas related to the language, to the idea of the language. Here we have the Russian expression «больше ни слова», no more words. And for me, it's a very big challenge how to translate this work to the bigger audience. So, yeah. We see now, actually, how the knowledge, how the interpretation is transmitted, how the ideas is sharing. and of course, I can speak about the history of, yeah. So if you are ready, I will skip that historical part and I'll give the mic to you. So please.
Okay, so I understood there is a public and they're observing a performance that is very confusing piece. They are confused, the observers, and the art piece is about balance. That sounds vague enough. I'm good at writing vague summaries. That's my secret skill.
Yeah. So now we can see this. So for me, the first thing, so what is written here, it's the phrase in Russian, «О чем речь вообще?» And it's a, yeah. Actually, no, it's only exists in the physical, and...
we can pass it.
Yeah, please. And it's a quite informal phrase, «О чем речь вообще?» It's constructed that way with a little bit of mistake in the language. And the translation, it means like, what is about in general. And here, like stylistically, I have some references, of course, from suprematism and from Russian constructivism, so-called Russian constructivism. So this is the example of how you can express many complex topics as, for example, the history of art, the national identity of some specific artistic style, also the tradition of working with language that came from Prigov, from Odessa conceptual artists as Sergei Anufriev and Leonid Vaitsekhov and Yuri Lederman. Everything I kind of pack here, and in the end, the people, they understand it, again, like specifically, but all these quotes, all these references somehow is hidden. And it's very important to open up these quotes, these layers of context through the verbal communication, through the sort of these lecture performances. So yeah, we can maybe, if we have time, do the second round.
Anyone wants to?
Yeah, we please. We can change the. Yeah, you see how it's easy. Yeah. The place is, yeah. Yep, please, please. No worries, no worries. It's a quite a funny one, and you pick it up the very, yeah. You need to explain it somehow. Be inventive in this because it's a very specific. It's require a lot of time. That's also almost each word there is complicated. Yeah, I will not spoiler you what it's about, but it's a quite actual piece and quite abstract. For me, also, humor, irony as a resistant tool is very important. And a lot of mechanics of violence, mechanic of like all the power constructions is represented in the language. And to avoid that, we need to break it through, and I'm trying to break this through the humor, through the deconstruction of the language, and especially like the Russian language, my mother language, I'm trying to deconstruct with the using of other Slavic languages, and everything is there in the colleges, and in a few moments we will see what is in that artwork. And it's also important, and I think we can give a word to you. You can say to us how you explain that as well, what you feel about that work, but after we will hear the final one. Yeah, so in general, this practice of transmitting knowledge, it's very important. It's rooted in the Soviet non-conformist art. It came from there when the censorship was very present, when their artistic field was full of self-censorship as well. And in general, like the special language of expression appears, and it has even older tradition in Russian literature, like Saltykov-Shchedrin. The idea of secret meanings, of double meanings, it's something that I'm trying to reflect in these works, and sometimes it's a very traditional artistic idea of paradox. So if you're ready, I'm stopping here, please. Yep.
So it's a really complicated image, really complex, yes. With maybe a lot of collages. But one key visual probably is a photo taken in an auditorium. I never forgot. But okay, a key sentence, something about decolonization. Maybe we will decolonize. Yeah, and then with a lot of people, really complex.
Yeah, so here it is, and please.
All the Russian speakers, we will decolonize KVN. I don't know, how do you explain that, right? I'll pass it on. KVN is a very, well, it's a very specific propaganda show that is supposed to be improvised, but at the same time, it's televised. So I think it's highly censored, and yeah, it is a very propagandistic show by students, performed by students. It's a humor show. And how do you decolonize it? That's why I say it's very complicated in all your works, and this one is very difficult to explain. But yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. First of all, the KVN, the work called "We decolonize KVN," "Мы деколонизируем KVN." It's a quite abstract propagandistic slogan. And for many, so first challenge for me, it's to explain to the audience what is KVN basically is. And it's an internal performative lecture to explain what it is, the history of KVN, the importance and the actuality, actually, because the Ukrainian president, his background is in this game. This is the Soviet TV program, blah, 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 very popular, very propagandistic nowadays. And also the connection between KVN and the processes of decolonization, and especially the processes of decolonization in Ukraine, is extremely important, and the manipulation, the wrong perception of decolonization is something that I want to speak about in this work. The ideas that implemented in Ukrainian context without proper analysis, and the kind of a sloganistic and propagandistic perception of decolonization, it's something that can be done very badly. So this collage is about it. If we have time, we can do, yeah, we can do the last round. So please, if someone want to participate in this like this, or I can do by my own as well. I can show you. Yeah, that's going to be even easier for me. It's yeah. I mean, so here this very specific one here is written "побеги," and for me, I will really need your help here because it's difficult to translate the whole complexity of this word "побеги" into English, because "побег" like escape, a sort of, but "бег" it's a run, and all the complexity that is hidden here in this collage. Yeah, it's maybe it's difficult for me to explain. I really need your help in this, because in the moment of interpretation, of course, I have all my sort of artistic meanings I can give to, yeah, to the audience. This one. So, yeah.
I just will also give maybe a little comment on the form as well, which I find very interesting in the context of, you know, the treachery of images. You know, like Magritte and René Magritte, for example, and the Marcel Brodard come into mind a lot, in a sense of, again, the complexity of not only it's not the complex image in itself. I think the complexity arises from the registers of meaning making and the knowledge creation that come from language and the visual register, but specific complexity come, and I think everybody said the word complex so far, interpreting it. And I think the complexity comes exactly from attempting to somehow commute the lines of the interpretation of reality through those registers, all of a sudden being mushed, basically. And that sort of makes, it almost becomes like a gym, basically, for
absolutely.
For the mind and the brain, in order to juxtapose, even for the person knowing the language, basically, especially transmitting it into the another language in this way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And you mentioned, and you said Marcel Broders and Magritte, and of course, Belgium, let's say, air. It's something that inspires me somehow, because I'm based there for many years. But the important, this sort of moments of interpretation and discovering the meaning of this can be done in the specific situations, in the exhibition, in the institutional spaces. It's very difficult to create a sort of a special moment for audience, actually, where the works presented itself and they're not leaving somehow. They are strictly all the interaction with the audience is limited.
They're didactic as well.
Yeah,
they're meant to make
yeah.
total sense in accordance to a particular register of communication. So therefore, you have all these obnoxious marketing departments who are trying to basically communicate a very particular message in order for the audience to buy a tote bag at the end of the exhibition. And that is a particular example basically of the work as I would interpret it, that would rather confuse you than explain you something in this way. And that's I think is very beautiful also illustration of the agency of the lecture performance as a productive confusion, unlike a productive functional basically vector that leads to a certain outcome, let's say, for the institution or for whatever institution is trying to achieve with audience, basically retention, communication, and all of these other obnoxious, again, marketing basically slang that is completely institutionalized at the moment by cultural institutions too.
Yeah, and here we had this example, and I'm happy that you even can touch this work somehow. So, yeah.
Anyone wants to explain pobegi out of the especially Russian speakers?
All the meanings, and of course, like the whole idea of escape, the whole idea of movement, the idea of transition from some point to another point. And in the college where you have these two runners in a sort of dynamic, sportish style, and the meaning of побег is completely it's something that strikes you, because you see the runners, but you have everything behind that in the word побеги, in the mistakenly in a sort of broken Russian.
When I actually saw the image when you showed it right now, the first association that flashed into my mind was Rudolf Nureyev, escaping Soviet Union in the New York Ballet. So, and the form of the побеги as basically escape
Yeah, please.
I could maybe offer побеги as a paradox, because побег is something that's just emerging from underground, and when I look at the picture, I see youth, something just springing out and springing out. But also побег is an exit, an exile, something that you come up to and then you escape.
Yeah, thank you. That's very very actual, and it's there, I hope. Yeah. So thank you so much. That was
thank you.
Very fast. Thank you.
Next, we have a hybrid intervention by Nikhil God, the junior research fellow in cinema at JNU, who is joining us from Delhi, I think. And their research deals with animals in film, and also they are working a lot on the film festivals. And actually the presentation itself is talking about the film festivals as the form of creating context, as well in discourse and conversation, that otherwise is impossible to frame. So Nikhil, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. I hope I'm audible to you all. Yeah. Right. So I'll just share my slides for this. Okay. Just give me a moment.
You go to share, and there will be share your screen.
Somehow it's not working. There's some failure happening with this. Um, so Dennis, you must have the slides, right? Can you put them up if it's possible?
We can't actually, it
Right.
technically needs to be from your side, but maybe start speaking and we'll see what we will, what we can figure out in a sense of your images going.
Okay, so I'm visible and audible, right?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My intervention for today is titled Informality as Resistance, Film Festival Networks as Critical Art Infrastructure. So, film festivals are an integral aspect of cinematic cultures within society, where they occupy an ambiguous middle between mainstream cinema industry and what is called in cinematic scholarship art cinema. This intervention attempts to capture the functioning of film festival networks with particular consideration to the ways of resistance that can exist through films and film viewing. So, the rationale behind this intervention is that scholarly analysis of film festivals has often considered them in the terms of actor network theory, a theory provided by Michael Kellogg, Bruno Latour, and John Law, which concerns itself with the convergence of material and semiotic networks within each other to constitute a whole. While the team behind the film festival is the primary stakeholder in the outcome of any festival, there is also the material realm, which includes films, sites, publicity material, technical apparatus, etc. Debate exists about considering film festivals as inherently networked, with the intervention being that they allow for certain singular phenomena that are not set up by the participants of the networks directly. These singular phenomena are an important aspect for this intervention, where the theoretical value of the terms network and circuit is indispensable. So, the idea of informality as resistance. Radical films have always been a wide ranging consideration, from the abstract works of the Absolute Film Group in 1920s Germany to various social dramas that critique aspects of society through narrative. It includes experimental films, documentaries, fiction features, and nearly all forms of cinema in one way or the other. The Cambridge Dictionary defines resistance as the act or power of resisting, opposing, or withstanding, which is a definition that can be applied liberally to various consequences of film festival functioning. The intervention moves away from a concentrated study of specific sites and locales of major film festivals. Here I mean your Cannes, Locarno, Berlin, and all these major big seven festivals, by focusing on the networks of the film festivals as the constituting energies behind what is produced at the site of the film festival. What is at focus is the nature of distribution that takes place through the film festival circuit, the transnational connections and solidarities that these networks facilitate, and the festival networks as the modes of contamination through which the unwarranted or the critical can emerge. So, as I said, three strands of resistance are important to this intervention. First is alternative distribution, second is transnational solidarities, and third is modes of contamination. So, alternative distribution. The relation between film festival networks and distribution is complex, where the existence of film festivals as an alternative mode of distribution is problematized. More acceptability is given to the notion of them as alternative exhibition spaces, since for distribution they have a similar political economy as something like Hollywood. What is lacking in this problematizing is how film festivals are also a major part of dissemination for documentaries and other films that do not find stable financing or viewership outside very limited television broadcasting or streaming. Film festivals as alternative modes of exhibition are strongly linked to their existence as alternative forms of distribution, as the channels of dissemination and construing are uniquely specific to the proliferation of film cultures. This dual nature of the film festival sustains itself, where film festival exhibition spaces can act as a precursor to the theoretical circulation and exhibition of films. This is beyond an understanding of film festivals as preceding theatrical run through a festival run by acknowledging that film festival networks allow several films to get industry professionals, enabling in their further distribution. Festival spaces are pre-theatrical exhibition, and their nature as institutions involved in film cultures flows downstream to the film's part of their programming, as have been evaluated by the festival adds a layer of legitimacy beyond aesthetics for entities interested in film distribution to get involved. This enmeshing has existed alongside the shift in distribution and has also turned several festivals like Sundance into becoming synonymous with giving directors a break into the industry. For example, at the Sundance Film Festival in 2011, television rights for Alex Stapleton's debut directorial documentary on Roger Corman titled Corman's World Exploits of a Hollywood Rebel was picked up by A and a Half Indie Films, the feature documentary production of A and a Half Network. The subsidiary picked up the documentary just before its premiere in the film festival, going by the repute of being programmed by the festival. Distributors use the film festival networks for scourging film productions to acquire, and filmmakers look for distributors. Tied into this is festival spaces as a production expense recouping for the filmmakers, be it through actual distribution contracts or through prize money or through festival buying films for viewing, etc. There's a whole ecosystem around films being able to garner and solicit payments from the festivals for their particular screening schedules. But this is where the institutional bend of the film festival comes in because they generally support which are backed by popular directors of art cinema, repute, and etc. New filmmakers are largely relegated to prize money and other avenues to get back the money involved in producing their respective films. This is a gap in the political economy of most film festivals, and yet there are numerous incidents on the contrary where new filmmakers of marginalized backgrounds have managed to get the production money back and also found distribution for their films. More and more film festivals are also getting involved with film production through film festival funds like World Cinema in Berlin or the Balkan Fund in Thessaloniki, which can allow for films sharing the curatorial vision of the film festival to get direct monetary and other kinds of support. It is imperative to extend the exhibition logic of film festival spaces from being audience oriented to also having director, producer, distributor, and linkages of other kinds through them. This works both at the specific point of the festival as an event and also through the awards bestowed upon the films that allow them to leverage distribution opportunities across film markets and medium. Sorry. For emerging filmmakers, this can supplant resources for their next venture, allowing one film to act as a funding pitch for the other, so as to create an ecosystem within which filmmakers thrive through their participation in film festival spaces. Carol Ray, in the book Documentary Film Festivals Transformative Learning, Community Building, and Solidarity, laments the focus on mainstream film festivals and ignoring of documentary film festivals which emphasize exhibition and distribution, specifically documentaries that deal with a range of issues from queer to indigenous rights that are not at the forefront in discourse of society. This role of the festivals in spearheading the proliferation of documentaries takes over from their most previous important viewing, that is television, which has come under increasing government and corporate control in taking up the cause of the documentary journalism from television and news broadcasting. Film festivals, by virtue of association, are now part of direct public engagement on a myriad of social issues. So, second strand of resistance was transnational solidarities. Film festivals, by design, are constituted through transnational networks, flows of capital, technologies, and energies, even if they are situated in the most particular of circumstances. A recent example of this phenomena is the Pakistani drama Joyland, where the film a jury prize and a Queer Palm awardee at the Cannes and in contention for nomination as the Pakistani representative to the Oscars, was banned in its home country, and then the film immediately traveled across borders to India after the banning, drawing huge crowds and reigniting shared cinematic connections across borders. This rekindling against the national restrictions on artistic mobilities shows the power of film to traverse contentious state borders to film festival networks, where commerce and the film industry are under stringent encroachment by the national. Film festivals, while being commercial entities in themselves, are also able to facilitate cinema against the restrictions of the state through their investment in cinema as an art form. Ida Hosek notes three principal ways in which film can reach their audience within and across national borders: through the market, the festival networks, and alternatives that include illicit methods like piracy. Many examples, including Joyland, complicate this neat classification and are arguments for film festivals to be embedded within the alternatives, even the illicit, where certain state controls exist on the movement of film practitioners, which can be surpassed through the movement of film texts. Ozek finds global film festival networks as spaces open to minor cinematographies, and it is here that one can construct a network dealing with transnational energies and viewership. Thomas Alsasser finds in them impulses to act as multipliers and amplifiers on several levels, with their primary functions still relegated to categorize, classify, sort, shift the world's annual film production. It is important here to note that the amplifying qualities of the film festival networks is a value in itself, and there also exists an argument for resistance at the classification level of any festival. The bringing together of varying differentialities and particularities can also be an argument for their potential as entities of resistance and the unconventional. Different constituents in transnational circuits have different positions vis-a modernity, film form, general socio-political development, thus adding layers to the festival networks that may not exist in the market-oriented distribution of cinema concerned with erasing the markers of particularities. Another central aspect of the transnational qualities of film festival networks is their accordance of refuge for filmmakers under persecution and exile. The filmmakers who are under state control or arrest have found transnational film festival networks as a refuge for their films. This is the most explicit in the case of Iranian cinema, where draconian arrests and jail sentences have been handed over to filmmakers at odds with the theocracy. These filmmakers include Jafar Panahi, Mohammad Rasulov, Mustafa Al Ahmed, Meena Kashmeri, Karanza Khasrovan, and many others. For each of these filmmakers, their films, comprising fiction, docufiction, and documentaries, are points of contention and many times the primary cause for their arrest. Parallel to this is a widespread appreciation of these filmmakers at several film festivals and attempts to garner ways to support these filmmakers within their countries and during their exile. While it is impossible to separate geopolitical impulses from shaping the drives of certain prominent film festivals based in Europe, a general drive of film festival networks has been to provide support to and platform to filmmakers in crisis. This drive has led to increased involvement in political engagement with initiatives like the International Coalition for Filmmakers at Risk, whose funding partners are the International Documentary Film Festival Amsterdam and the International Film Festival Rotterdam. This is the nature of film festival networks and the place they occupy within the ordeal of a filmmaker's arrest or exile. Through distribution, awards, support, speeches, and many other initiatives, film festivals are able to force through their transnational circuits various modes of resistance for filmmakers in peril. The third strand is the modes of contamination. Film festival networks that are not explicitly geared towards championing or platforming marginalized ideas, people, and films are also open to contamination by the very functioning of festival networks. The mainstream theatrical distribution rarely allows for a coming together of films in a particular strand of thought or imagination, usually only restricted to double billings and other kinds of very selective sort of viewing. Each and almost every film festival, on the other hand, brings together through its programming and curatorial decisions cinemas that collect and converse together along certain strands of commonalities. Horror film festivals bring together horror films of certain types, which is a way of viewing totally alien from the singular logics of the market release. Uh, Engagement is possible across multiple films that correspond, coagulate, and critique one another, opening up avenues for dialogue and discussion to ferment onto the festival space through its nature as a network of congruence, bringing together cinema of specific wavelengths. This is also an argument independent of just viewing all the corresponding films, but one of inhabitation into the festival network, where just I think Thomas Alsasser describes this as festivals forming a cluster of consecutive venues to which films, directors, producers, promoters, and press in various degrees of density, integrity migrate like flocks of birds together. The enmeshing is not at the venues, international or otherwise, but the migration of the network created by the migration as energies converge and diverge to the festival impulses is what creates these different kinds of discourses. New forms of film appraisal, literacy, and criticism are opened up by film festival networks, incorporating various kinds of films in various conceptual networks. In its truest sense, a film festival is where one
Nikhil,
can chart
two
different.
minutes. 2 minutes, Nikhil.
Oh, right, right. I'll just make it quick. Yeah. Yeah. So the corruption of the pure or the national, official, or hegemonic is a possibility inherent to film festival networks as the nature of participants and participation is dynamic. Just to conclude, or the case for film festival networks constituted of films, cinephiles, industry professionals, venue, transport, and much more are entities dynamic and thus essential to film cultures. These networks harness the power of film and its potential to familiarize and defamiliarize many narratives about the world. That'll be all. Thank you. Thank you for being here and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nikhil. I specifically liked in the end the metaphor of the informal flock of birds that is migrating from one area into another in order to have something to perform and say actually in specific, in a non-formal context. So the next intervention, we have Supraja Ramesh, who is the doctoral scholar in Brunel University, who studies theater and experimental performance, and she will speak about actually a dear friend of mine, and I'm very excited about her talk because I was actually lucky to see his performance in Kochi Biennial called Hallucinations of the Artefact, just at the Kochi Biennial that opened about 5 weeks ago. So Supraja will tell us all about it.
Okay, so I'm going to stand up because, yeah, I much prefer moving around, and I realize the camera's over there. Okay, fun. Everywhere. Oh my God, we're all being watched. Okay. Okay, so good evening. Good, is it evening? I don't know. In India, apparently it's evening. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so I've got something to say for 5 minutes that's going to kind of set the tone. Ew, I can hear myself echo. And then we're going to have Tim play my video contribution. Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. I recognize this conference leans heavily on visual markers. Caught as I am in a language of sight that feels even more pronounced here at a visual cultures art history conference. And yet, in our shared pursuit to critique, to disrupt, to unravel, and to reimagine the visual apparatus that so often confines and polices queer or trans, or even largely, as I study it, non-conforming bodies, I offer instead a description not of images, but of feeling. I sense anticipation, not the sharp edge of anxiety, but a warm, unspoken trust, a gathering of spirits bound by purpose as I come together with my fellow panelists, the chair, and all of you gathered here today. So I'd like to share now in a minute or two, prior to Tim's sharing of my video contribution, a way to enter and navigate the movement of gender and sexual non-conforming space that this will open up. So one, my position. I am a dominant caste, intercaste person from the Telugu and Kannada-speaking regions of South India. I hold an interdisciplinary training across psychology, arts and aesthetics, and literary studies. Never stopped reading. It has now been 3, moving on 4 months of my journey to a PhD at Brunel as a recipient of the Techni Arts and Humanities Research Council Doctorate Training Partnership. It's a mouthful, and it took quite a while to get here. 2, my published work has conceptualized cleaving as an aesthetic modality that engages with the instabilities of gender and sexual non-conforming identities or expression. By instabilities, I respond to gender and women's studies critiques of the mainstream assimilation of feminist liberation, as they often exclude queer genders or sexual expressions. I argue that this exclusion reflects anxieties about queerness's instability, which allows for a diverse expression beyond essentialized boundaries of ethnicity or even binary identities. And these tensions informed my first journal article for Critical Stages, analyzing 2 feminist theatrical productions in Bangalore, and this was back in 21. And a more recent publication in 23 in the Contemporary Theatre Review revisited India's 2018 decriminalization of homosexuality, analyzing yet again another postgraduate play from a university that was going through protests around caste and institutional violence. So both analyses so far reveal the complex dynamics of caste, gender, race, and sexuality in contemporary India, with cleaving functioning then in my previous thought as rupture. But now with my PhD, I'm thinking of this as a doubleness where it also involves a holding, right? And it also, therefore, that is a contention, allows for a suspension of an aesthetic, of an aesthetics, but also of a larger sense of reckoning in encounter. So, 3, in my contribution to the Performing Knowledges panel today, I come to you as a scholar who moves shamelessly across disciplines, not with the bid to ransack methodologies, but to practice capaciousness and dialogue, of allowing for a weaving, a braiding, a certain kind of suturing, putting together of the flesh, of multiple voices into a fluid tapestry. So in my video contribution, you will find instances of Mandeep Raikhy's luminous performance lecture from during my Performance Studies International funded constant program back in 2025, snippets of a talk that was delivered last October on the dancing girl of Mohenjo-daro by my former art history professor at JNU, New Delhi, Professor Naman Ahuja, and also parts of the performance itself at its debut at Black Box Okhla in New Delhi, which I attended in July 2023. There are also a few seconds of a gesture from Mandeep's Queering the Tribanga, which again took place in Bangalore's Alliance Française in the summer of 2022. So yeah, Tim, over to you.
Into lived processes, embodied experiences, broken trajectories and lineages, and choreographic gestures that are remembered and forgotten. The Mobius strip offers a rich metaphor. It's quite, for me, it's quite a choreographic image. You move forward, but you end up sideways. You turn inward, but you find yourself on the outside. It captures the feeling of losing control, of the body constantly having to respond, adjust, reorient itself. It is in this consistent adjustment, readjustment, really like a radio trying to tune into a frequency, that I want to place today's session. The theme of performing remarking invites us to ask a very simple question. What do we mark with our bodies, and what remarks us in return? In my practice, this relates quite closely to a methodology I am now tempted to call cleaving, the simultaneous act of splitting apart and holding together. Today I offer a structure that loops and leaps. We'll move together, we'll speak, we'll listen, we'll remember and forget. So take a breather. There's a little bit of moving also coming your way as an invitation.
You found them frozen, bronze cool, wrist cocked, chin tilted, a posture mistaken for permanence. But posture is not stillness. Stance is not silence. What you call artifact is only a pause, mid-breath. Listen, can you hear the residue of the heat? They arrive to you through a crack, not through history, not through lineage, but through a glitch, a stutter in time, a misfiring archive, a hallucination mistaken for origin. They are sweat before classification. They are muscle before metaphor. They are the guttural utterance that escapes when language collapses under its own certainty. They do not dance for you. They dance because something insists, because bronze remembers fire, because ruin is not the opposite of movement, but an echo. They cleave to your gaze. They cleave the sanctity of your seeing. They cleave the devotional eye that wants them radiant but obedient, sacred but silent, glowing yet fixed. Your darsanic gaze reaches for them, holy, hungry, stabilizing. You want to see God, you want to see Mother, you want to see nation, standing firmly on one bent hip. But the hip does not belong to you. The wrist does not circle your myth. The anklet rattles against chronology itself. They vibrate. The sound comes first, arrhythmic, off-center, a beat that refuses to resolve, a pulse that trips over itself, then returns, altered, misaligned, swollen. The dancers arrive not as bodies but as disturbances, three of them, one fractured into three temporalities, or the same body, seen from different centuries. Their feet do not run together, their breaths do not synchronize, their gestures repeat, then decay, then mutilate, mid-repetition. This is not unison, this is contagion. They slip between them, sometimes skin, sometimes projection, sometimes a smear of light across ruin. Hallucinating, dreaming, not here, and yet they have arrived.
People of Indian museums make her conform to the very values that she once challenged. One cannot but wonder if the 4,500-year-old Mohenjo-daro girl were to see this as an assault on her identity. Would she have smiled at the sculpture as suggested by Agha Shahid Ali's 1990 poem called At the Museum, published in the journal Poetry in 1990? In the last few lines of the poem, it celebrates her beauty as a sexual thing for the amusement of older privileged men, while the body of the poem remarks on the extraordinary capacity of her labor that goes unnoticed. Right? He acknowledges both opinions. 1990, he wrote this poem. Quite a nice paper. Let's read it. But in 2500 BC, Harappa, who cast in bronze a servant girl, No one keeps records of slaves and soldiers. What label are we going to give her is what we are discussing, right? Servant girl, soldier, slave. He's already gone through the three. The sculptor knew this, polishing the ache of her fingers stiff from washing the walls and scrubbing the floors, from stirring the meat and crushing the heel of asafoetida in the bitter gourd in the carreras. But I'm grateful she smiled at the sculptor as she smiles at me in bronze, a child who had to play woman to her lord.
The last work that I want to talk about today, Hallucinations of an Artefact, the work that I created in 2023. It engages somehow with the theme of remarking by animating and unsettling and reimagining the dancing girl of the Indus Valley civilization, an ancient artifact whose meaning has been repeatedly asserted, politicized, appropriated over time. Rather than treating her as a static symbol or a frozen relic that could passively receive all kinds of narratives being imposed on it, the work asks, what if she could think, breathe, perspire, evolve? What if she could dance back to us? This is where remarking, the question of remarking comes in. The performance pushes back against the many identities that have been imposed on the dancing girl, whether as a national treasure, a goddess, a mother, and very often through state propaganda. Through movement and artificial intelligence, the work doesn't attempt to define her in any particular way, but rather remarks her. It allows her to resist, the dancing girl to resist classification, to somehow still remain ungraspable and become irreverent. At the same time, Hallucinations of an Artefact embodies also the logic of cleaving, splitting from and holding on to the past. It cleaves away from the dominant historical, religious, nationalist narratives that try to fix the artifact in place by cleaving towards her mystery, ambiguity, her capacity to disrupt or pose questions. The work doesn't seek to restore any true meaning attached to this artifact. It revels in the multiplicity, in the hallucination, in the space of imagination, in the gaps that history simply can't fill. I have one last exploration coming your way to experience this in our bodies. It's a complicated one, and I'm going to give you a little bit more time. And I'm very happy for you to also imagine yourself as the dancing girl. But imagine an ancient object waking up inside your body. Where does it settle? How does it move? What stories emerge when the artifact begins to dream through you? So in a sense, what I'm really asking you to do is also to distort time, to shift between memory, myth, imagination. I just invite you to not think a lot, but simply see how an artifact could move through you.
They are rendered, they are unrendered. Their bronze liquefies, pixelates, recoagulates, blood in silhouette. Unnamed landscapes, neither Mohenjo-daro nor the museum, nor even the White Cube, neither temple nor a stage. Ruin is their collaborator. Ruin understands duration. Ruin does not mourn loss, but practices transformation. For every crumble in Mandeep's choreography allows for an erosion in a score. There is a porosity. Sound bleeds into skin, light presses against muscle, touch becomes visible, sight begins to sweat, haptic leaks. You feel them before you see them. A pressure behind the sternum, a tremor in the calves, a heat that does not originate in a lamp. This is a hypersensory radiance, not the kind you sanctify, not the halo, not the divine glow that confirms belief, but a radiance that flickers, a radiance that glitters, a radiance that arrives too early, too late, too out of sequence, too out of devotion. You move forward, and yet you move sideways. Unclassification. The art historian Namanapuja whispers, what if they were a warrior? What if their stance was readiness, not seduction? What if their stillness was strategy? What if dance and combat were never opposites? The past does not arrive as the past. Time thickens into pressure. Repetition without origin. Beats that refuse to settle. A syncopation of leaking, cleaving again. Cleaving between touch and sight.
What label are we going to give her is what we are discussing, right? Servant girl, soldier, slave. He's already gone through the three. The sculptor knew this, polishing the ache of her fingers stiff from washing the walls and scrubbing the floors, from stirring the meat and crushing the heme or asafoetida in the bitter gourd in the carreras. But I am grateful she smiled at the sculptor as she smiles at me in bronze, a child who had to play woman to her lord. The young dancing girl who is the Devadasi. He acknowledges all the interpretations in his lovely poem as he put down. So he says, a child who had to play woman to her lord when the warm June rains, I came to Harappa. It's actually not Harappa, Mohenjo-daro.
Cleaving again between reverence and play. This is irreverent, this is playful, this is informal. Do not confuse play with lack of rigor. Play destabilizes faster than critique. They mock your seriousness. They shimmy against your solemnity. Their ankles rattle like laughter in a courtroom. For they are not mother, they do not reproduce your lineage. They are not goddess, they do not redeem your sins. They are not mascot, they do not smile, not command. They are movement thinking itself. As the sequence falls back into itself, as gestures return, altered, as sound distorts, something opens. Not clarity, but resonance. And you leave without conclusion. Take this sensation with you. Take this pressure behind the eyes. Let them remain unresolved, indeterminate. Because they are not finished. They are not past, they are not yours, they are not present. And yet, they are still dancing. In place, in history, and yet within the cleaving. A cleaving between ruin and breath, glitch and glow, between what you can name and what insists on moving away.
Thank you so much, Supraja. And we have a last. And we have a last intervention, the lecture performance by Sweety Taur, who is a designer, a curator, and a scholar, as well, an academic working with storytelling and complex systems theory. And yeah, the floor is yours.
You just can wave me a hand and I will do it. Or give me signal.
Thank you for the introduction, Denis. Hello, everyone. I guess I'll just dive right into it. I often think about what an ideal home looks like in popular media, how it is presented as a final state, something to arrive at, a space that promises ease, but only after something has been changed, replaced, or upgraded. Growing up with interior design magazines, newspapers, films, and satellite television, I encountered a very specific image of satisfaction. Prim interiors, spacious layouts, carefully themed homes, neighborhoods that existed more easily on the screen than everyday Indian life, the kind of domestic calm cinema perfected, the kind of home someone like Yash Chopra, if you're aware, would show. What I encountered far less often were images of ordinary Indian homes being allowed the same sense of completion, the same visual confidence, the same right to feel resolved. This absence did not read as a gap for very long. It began to feel instructional, as if satisfaction had to be postponed, as if aspiration was always meant to point somewhere else. This work begins there. It is an attempt to visualize Indian aspirational homes not as a transitional space or compromised versions of the ideal, but as interiors that are already expressive, already deliberate, already at ease. In Hindi, there is a phrase we use when we meet someone and we are genuinely happy to meet them. We say, "Aapse milke khushi hui." Translates as "happy to meet you." This is not politeness. It is recognition. It means that I see what you're doing, and I'm glad that you exist the way you are. This home does not announce its boundaries. It negotiates them. An arch frames another arch, and then another, creating a sequence rather than a room. A curtain walks fluid like a wall. Bicycle rests where circulation pauses. Furniture waits to perform when needed. Movement, light, privacy, and storage are resolved through constant adjustment. Nothing is fixed permanently. Everything can be moved, folded, shifted, reopened. What appears informal is in fact highly calibrated. This is an interior shaped by passage, by return, by daily choreography, a home that does not seek completion, but remains open to change, to interruption, and to life passing through. Here, the ideal never replaced the real. Behind the television, the wall is finished with an heirloom plaster technique called araish. When electricity arrived later, it did not override the surface. The plug point was fitted above, allowing the ornament to remain intact. What could have been treated as an inconvenience is handled as a negotiation. This is not preservation through display. It is preservation through everyday restraint. A home where progress adjusts itself around what already deserves to stay. Next. This corner tells us history of electricity and technology at home. Built at a moment when power was occasional, not foundational, the house offered only few outlets. Over time, new necessities arrived, but the architecture did not expand to accommodate them. Instead, life adapted. A single plug point gathers a router, a microwave, a mosquito racket, and multiple utilities between changes. Utility converges not by design, but by necessity. What looks accidental is in fact precise, outcome of years of adjustment. Alongside these devices sits a photograph of an ancestor and a small decorative object, placed here not for symbolism, but because this corner holds attention. Memory settles where utility already exists. This is not cluttered. This is temporal living. They ooze a power that rarely announces itself. It lives in habits, in decisions made once and repeated daily, in rules that were never written, yet rarely broken. Next. Time is visible in this room. A wall clock keeps the formal time, where everyday time settles just around it, hung into shirts, stacked into furniture, waiting for the next use. There is no wardrobe drama here, no concealed storage. Clothing stays close to the body's rhythm, rather than the room's symmetry. Plastic chairs sit lightly, easily moved, easily replaced. A small wooden table holds what arrives temporarily, a folded cloth, a passing task, something set down, not yet decided. Nothing is fixed beyond necessity. It is not a space designed to be admired. It is designed to remain available. The wall carries marks of touch and repetition and weathering. The furniture accepts wear without apology. The room does not perform permanence. It practices continuity. Here, comfort comes not from completion, but from knowing that everything can be reached, shifted, and lived with again tomorrow. Next. This window refuses to choose a single solution. An air conditioner settles itself into one half. An air cooler occupies the other. The curtains are not decorative. They are negotiators, tied, loosened, adjusted as the day changes. What looks like duplication is actually care. On softer summer days, the cooler suffices. When the heat sharpens, the air conditioner takes over. Energy is not consumed by default. It is measured against discomfort. Comfort here is situational, not absolute. The window becomes an interface rather than a boundary, mediating air, electricity, habit, and restraint. What looks improvised is in fact a careful refusal to overcome it. This is not an ego statement pinned to the wall. It is daily decisions, quietly repeated. Next, please. This corner does not try to stay current. Set slightly apart from the living room, it holds paces of a centenarian life. Medicines, steel bottles, duvet sheets, small rituals of care arranged within reach. This space is designed for resting without explanation, for watching the day pass without needing to participate into it. In a home that has changed many times, this corner has been allowed to remain steady, not to archive, but to respect the likings of the one who's occupying it. The plant arrived gradually in this courtyard, adapting to the narrow band of the sun and the shade. Above, everyday objects rest behind grills, suspended between use and pause. Below, the greenery cools the air without announcing intention. This is a garden that is allowed to grow where it could survive. Next. This wall carries water, light, heat, and habit. A wash basin stands outdoors, responding to the plumbing location rather than the convention. Pipes remain visible. Repairs are not hidden. Surfaces are allowed to age. Domestic life unfolds without hierarchy. Washing, bathing, storage, and waiting share the same ground. Curtains and the bed sheets soften the doorways. Air becomes a drying system. It is a space designed to function, and in that refusal to perform emerges continuity, a quiet confidence of things being exactly where they need to be. This shelf holds water in many ways. Set into the entry courtyard, it's both storage and threshold. Vessels of different materials and sizes line up without hierarchy. Each turn to a particular need. A quick drink, a shared meal, a ritual moment, a season of the year. Clay sits next to the steel, copper near the aluminium. None replaces the other, they coexist, chosen for how they hold, cool, pour, and return to the shelf. These pots have arrived over decades, some inherited, some acquired, some worn thin by use. Together they perform a domestic system of measurement, care, and memory. This is a way of measuring need. Next. A storeroom for food and daylight. Nothing is wasted. Not space, not illumination. The steel next to the window reflects the light inward, multiplying what enters through a single window. What is urgent stays within the reach. What can wait hangs back. There is no excess circulation here. Movement is minimal, efficient, rehearsed. The room knows its sequence, its prioritization made visible. Thanks. This wall behaves like a building. What looks like an ordinary partition is actually a system of windows, vents, and thresholds carefully composed to let air move while privacy stays intact. The geometry is not decorative, it is calibrated. A doctor working with a local contractor and a civil engineer has translated the logic of Hawa Mahal into a domestic scale. Hawa Mahal is the iconic monument in Jaipur, in India. Not copying the arches, but borrowing its intelligence. Staggered opening, shifting transparencies allow heat, sound, and sight to be negotiated in real time. There is no drawing pin to the wall to explain it, no heritage plaque to declare its lineage. Yet the knowledge is there, embedded in the way glass breaks into the panels, the way light enters, the way air flows. This is architecture remembered through doing, not as preservation, but as habit. Next. This cabinet is not a storage, it's a biography. Every shelf holds a different chapter of household's life. At the top, the small brass trophies and the plastic toys sit together like a family portrait of achievement and play. At the top, below them, paintbrushes, newspapers, tools, and ritual objects drift into one another, as if the home refuses to decide where work ends and the worship begins. The middle shelves feel almost devotional. Framed deities, incense, remnants, old bottles, and medicine tubes share the same narrow ledge. Care here is not separated into categories. It flows through the spiritual to the pharmaceutical without an apology. And then, at the base, a dense congregation of creams, sprays, balms, mosquito repellents, and everyday hygiene products gather. This is where the body meets the world, where the protection, presentation are managed one bottle at a time. What looks like a clutter is a system built through use instead of planning. Next. This telephone does not rest on a table. It is being given a shrine. A small plywood shelf wrapped in embossed metallic foil lifts it away from the wall, turning an everyday device into something quite ceremonial. This decorative technique is generally used to dress the wedding furniture and the temple chests, but now it carries a phone. Yeah? So this is utility dressed in a ritual. The pink wall does not try to be neutral. It holds the scene like a stage. The black phone, the silver patterns, and the marigold garland, they all meet in a small, cozy domestic choreography. This is how objects enter homes. They are not absorbed, they're hosted. A communication becomes a threshold. Modern life learns to stand on surfaces shaped by older ways of making things. This vessel sits somewhere between a bathtub and a bucket. Its form borrows the deep, upright geometry of a Japanese soaking tub, but it's made locally using a bucket maker's skill. It's made with hand-rolled metal. The seams are visible. The base is improvised to lift it from the damp floor. It is not sold as wellness. It was made because someone wanted to soak their full body, and this was the tool available to do it. A global idea arrives, but it is translated through a neighborhood workshop, not a catalog. What results is neither imported nor nostalgic. It is precise, functional, and quietly inventive. Here, aspiration does not override skill. It leans on it. This wall reads like a diary that never learned to whisper. A century-old household where a teenage boy is growing up. The weight of the long memory hums with the everyday contemporary urgency. Medals hang beside his football heroes. A hand-drawn, powerful sits between Messi and the Manchester United. Achievement, fantasy, and self-belief are taped together with fairy lights and the thin green wire. Above all, an empty bulb holder waits, a small, unfinished promise of light. Nothing here is polished, and yet nothing is accidental. Every poster is a quiet declaration, every ribbon a rehearsal for a future imagined beyond these walls. This is inherited architecture. Ambition does not erase the past. It simply pins new dreams directly on top of it. Where does the street end, and where does the home begin? Outside, a man pauses with his bicycle beneath a flowering hedge. The city offers him a small pocket of shade and softness. He steps into it without ceremony. No bench, no plaza, just a moment carved out of movement and pause. Inside, a wall does something quite similar. One clock, two calendars. One arrives free with a daily newspaper aligned to the office weeks and global months and public holidays. The other one is a traditional Indian almanac, dense with lunar days, festivals, and seasonal calculation. A different way of measuring when things should happen. They hang side by side not as a statement, but as a practical arrangement. One keeps the household synced to the outside world, and the other keeps aligned to the older, cyclical time. Both are quite accumulations, neither designed, but deeply composed. And somewhere between the street and the living room, a question lingers. Who is teaching whom? Who is learning from whom? The city teaches the body when to pause. The home learns how to hold many tempos at once. In both places, beauty does not announce itself. It settles. This is what I mean by utopia. Not perfection, but a condition where people are sufficiently self-assured to organize life on their own terms. Even while surrounded by other ideals, these homes have not withdrawn from the world. They've learned how to live with it without being consumed by it. Spending time with them, what stays with me is a steady confidence. A confidence to repair rather than replace, to customize rather than consume, to localize rather than get inspiration from distant catalogs. In a living space with ease and repose rather than performing perfection for an outside gaze. Witnessing how people shape their homes with imagination and intent fills me with deep joy and hope. It is in this spirit that I say, Aapse milke khushi hui. Happy to meet you. I would also like to share a little background if the time allows. So a little bit about myself. I dabble with a lot of mediums. I create through furniture, spaces, through earth building, through writing, photography, and many more. Basically, I feel like I find it very hard to commit to one medium, and the ideas sort of, I guess they deserve this kind of a transitional space. So the work that you're seeing comes from the city of Jaipur. I've deliberately chosen to start this project here because if you have a background on the city of Jaipur, it was set up in a startup fashion by the Maharaja, which is basically the city was designed to meet its own needs through the skills that were collected within the city walls, and to also generate revenue through this. So basically, if local population consumes from the local makers, it's kind of an autopoiesis. So I went to the city, I read 30 of the generational middle-income households, and that's what you see as the compilation over here. And why I choose to do this is when I started studying furniture design at the National Institute of Design. I've also been a faculty there in India. It's a Bauhaus-inspired design school in India, and what I expected the course to deliver for my surroundings, because I am also from an aspirational household in India, so I found like a big gap as a student. I was helpless. As a faculty, when I returned there, I again felt helpless because there's not even enough scholarship of it. So what you saw today was my attempt. This is where I started collecting this work. Here you saw a performative aspect of it, but I have also written academically around it. I very much like to theorize as well. So yeah, that's a little background of this work. Thank you.
I think it was a very nice full circle that we came from the trying to define what is lecture performance to actually sort of a piece of symbiotic poetry almost, which we now saw in relation to particular living space as well. So thank you so much. So now we have a break of 20 minutes. You feel free to approach all the speakers, and speak more. I wish we had time for a panel after that, but for that we need another 2 days. So in the next panel in 20 minutes.